we're often the only person in our family or in our community who is trying to get in touch with our soul. And so we feel really alone. And then because of what's happened in history around the sacred feminine being erased and wiped out in a very violent way, we actually are scared of our own intuition. And so to get into a room and to finally just first feel how the other women are on the similar path, and then to take a moment to share your journey and to just be seen, you just realize that you're not broken and that nothing's wrong with you.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I just had a fascinating interview with a guest named Sarah Jenks. And Sarah is someone that I've known for so long, but this is literally the first time we've spoken directly, but I'm not kidding you guys. I've known her through other friends for 15 years, I swear, when we both lived in New York. And I don't know why, I just never found my way. People are like, don't you know, aren't you friends with Sarah Jenks? But I wasn't. Anyway, it came down to it. Someone said, she should be on your show. And I was like, amazing. Because I knew she was doing something different. When I knew Sarah, she was like a health coach and a weight loss expert, basically, and was very successful and everyone really liked her. And then there was this period of time where I didn't see her doing very much. And then she reemerged as something else. So she is so interesting. She is an ordained priestess, and she is an expert on women gathering, basically on the divine feminine, on the cycles of the moon, all of this stuff. But she comes from this very traditional background. So it's so interesting. I learned so much interviewing her, and I'm really so excited. I totally want to go to her next full moon thing. So anyway, I hope that you guys learn something, get inspired to gather with other women by listening to my interview with Sarah Jenks. Well, hello. I'm so excited, you guys, to welcome Sarah Jenks to the Terri Cole Show. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I know. What does it feel like? We've literally known each other through other people for about 15 years.
I know. I'm so happy we get to connect. It's the best.
Me too. I'm super interested in the work that you do. And what I want to start with is tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Yeah.
How did you get doing what you do, and how would you even describe what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up outside of Boston, 5 minutes from where I live right now, which is a whole other journey that we should talk about. And I grew up in a very just traditional family from the burbs of Boston. I had a white picket fence around my house. I was very driven as a child and in high school. And I went to Williams, which is the #1 liberal arts school in the country. And I was teed up to have a very traditional path of success. And all of my friends from college went on to be lawyers and bankers and work in the government and are all up to really amazing things. And I went into advertising, which to everybody there was really non-traditional. So that was my first foray into breaking the mold a little bit, which was just a hairline outside of, the traditional path. So I went into advertising. I realized very quickly that I couldn't work for somebody else. And I went into health coaching because I had struggled with emotional eating my entire life. And I wanted to get down to what was really going on with me. I built a very successful health coaching company. I married a doctor. We moved to San Francisco. We're living in a very cute Victorian house. I am completely miserable. And I find myself in therapy with a really great therapist. We've been working together for months. I walk into her office one day with a polo shirt and pearls, and she has back jacks on the floor, and you can smell incense from the night before, and the candles are all burned down, and she has pictures of these beautiful women on the walls. And I walked into the space and I just had goosebumps all over my body, and I started to weep. And I looked at her and I said, "What happened here?" And she sort of leaned back and like gave me an up and down because I think she was surprised that I even noticed that there was something going on. And she said, I'll tell you when you're ready. And that began this hunger for understanding why I had this reaction to just like some chairs on the floor.
Right.
And I felt like I was remembering a part of me that had been lost since childhood. And what I discovered in my hunger and my curiosity, and as I started really grilling my therapist, was that she
Mm.
had had a ceremony based on the principles of the sacred feminine in her home. And I just kept saying, let me in, let me in, let me in. I need to be a part of this. And so when I went to my first ceremony, it was the most profound experience because I met a part of myself that I had never met before that felt like the truest version of me.
Mm.
And I realized how I had spent my whole life playing a part. And it was nobody's fault. You know, so many of us grew up playing a part, trying to make other people happy, following in line, following the culture of our family. It wasn't that I was like super unhappy, but as I became an adult, that's when I began to be unhappy and to notice that this actually wasn't the identity that I wanted to play out. And then it began the journey of really listening to this voice that said, you aren't who you think you are. And
Mm.
how could I close a really successful coaching program and become a priestess? Like, that was the weirdest thing that anyone could have told me to do. And I fought it tooth and nail. But I kept going to ceremony because I loved it. It was the only thing that was bringing me peace. And I then went into the inquiry of how is a woman who was raised to be successful and independent and think outside the box become a person who was just petrified to rock the boat, always
Mm.
thinking about what my husband was going to think if I changed career paths, worried about what my friends are going to think, constantly worried about what my parents are going to think and being judged, what my clients were going to do, my business was going to close. And I was overcome with all these feelings. So I started asking people about this. And I know this is where our work really dovetails. And
Mhm.
I just was like, it is not 1950 anymore. Why do we all feel this way? And I
Mhm.
went into some deep research and I ended up going the history route. I kept going back and back and back and back and back. It was like, was there ever a time that we felt free to be ourselves? And I ended up
Mm.
going back like 4,000 years and really discovering that there was this time when the sacred feminine was part of our culture where we actually worshiped male gods and female gods, where the different deities were pretty balanced in their gender. You know, we honored the cycles of the earth. We understood the moon. When women bled, we went into the moon lodge and into red tents, and we were worshipped for being embodiments of the goddess. And I was like, that sounds great. What happened?
Right.
And I ended up studying really the erasure and the downfall of the sacred feminine and making all these connections between our psychology today and things that happened thousands of years ago, and wondered, okay, well, if the oppressive patriarchy knew that they could remove the sacred feminine to control women, what happens when we bring it back?
Mm.
And that's been the center of my work for the past 5 years, is reintegrating the sacred feminine back into our everyday life so that we can remember our power and have a metaphor for what it means to be a powerful woman and actually chart our soul's path instead of the path that was laid out by everybody around us.
Wow. That I have so many things to say and so many questions.
Right.
But and so many questions about so many things. So let's start with, how would you define the sacred feminine?
Yes, it's a great question. So, what I love about this question is that the sacred feminine is so vast and it's actually very hard to define. The way I
Mhm.
like to define it, this is just for me, and I invite everyone to do their own inquiry around this. I like to think about the sun is a representation of the sacred masculine. It rises at about the same time every day and sets at about the same time, and it changes very, very slowly, and it's very sustaining. It's very predictable. It's mostly very still, and it's a beautiful, amazing, life-giving force. And then the sacred feminine is sort of like the moon, where it rises and sets at very different times every day. The sun goes through one zodiac sign in a month, where the moon goes through a zodiac sign every 2.5 days.
Mm,
So it's ever changing and it's mysterious. And when we also look at moon wisdom, we think about womb wisdom
mm,
and how the feminine, again, is this force of not necessarily sustainability, but creativity. And I believe that we all have access to this energy of dying and being reborn and dying and being reborn. And then the other part that I really like to focus on with the sacred feminine is that it's about being in the body, and it's about really understanding how our lives can be like a magic walk and a reflection of the earth. And I could just like go on and on, but it's also about being a reflection of nature. And we can even just think about like the core noble mother is such a sacred feminine energy, the lover, and but also like the primal goddess and Kali. And the sacred feminine has range, and she has so many
mhm.
faces. And I loved learning about, a big part of my study has been learning the 13 archetypes of the sacred feminine, and to feel the range of the feminine, I think has been one of the most powerful things for me, because it's given me permission to have range myself.
What's so interesting about what you're saying is that when you think about the erasure
Mm-hmm.
of the sacred feminine, how the range of emotions that
Mm-hmm.
women were allowed to have, and this again is where our stuff dovetails, was not okay to have a range.
No.
So especially anger. And it was so funny. I just did something on a quote that Dr. Harriet Lerner talked about, like, why is the angry woman so threatening?
Yeah.
Like, why? And the only way that anything gets done is if we tap into that part of us that is angry. I mean, that's one really powerful way to change
Yep.
societal things and to change things in our own personal lives as well. But what happens when we get cut off? And, Sarah, I think you sharing your origin story. And again, as you said, it's not blame. That's not what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. We're just talking about generations of the erasure
Yep.
then led you and me and millions of other, hundreds of millions of other women to looking at a life sort of checking boxes where it's like, this is supposed to bring me happiness.
Yeah.
This is supposed to bring me fulfillment, satisfaction, joy. And yet, and I think that the dark night of the soul that you described, that you had, and I had my own around being in entertainment and changing my careers and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. But so many, I mean, I've had tens of thousands of clients at this point in my career. Women have reached the point of being adulthood, as you said, getting to this point and starting to question.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I was sort of seeking a feeling
Mm-hmm.
that I thought my ambition and success and money and famous clients. I don't know if I consciously thought that, but I was certainly seeking something.
Yeah.
And then I was not finding the thing I thought I was going to find at the top of the pile of money and prestige and fame and power and all of the stuff that when I was an agent, that was part of my world.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because it was the part that I disliked the most. It was the part that I was the least connected to. And you could sort of see my transformation in real time,
Mm.
where my own therapeutic journey brought me to a place of having to look at my career and go, oh my God, like I've committed to this for so long. I'm already really successful. The same conflict that you had with closing your practice.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do now? And I found that of course, I still stayed longer because it was so threatening to leave where I was masterful, where I was considered already successful, and all of those things.
Mhm.
But what ended up happening is I could no longer deny that I didn't care about the big movie contract or the Pantene deal.
Yeah.
That what I cared about was the mental wellness of my clients.
Mm.
And I was helping people get into eating disorder clinics and therapy and all of these things. And you just get to a point where for me, I had to pivot, even though I was scared, but I was excited. And then when I did pivot and went back to grad school and was like, yeah, duh, this is what I should be doing. This is what I love doing. But it took a lot of sort of going against the grain.
Mhm.
And my family, I didn't have pressure from them to be anything. I was always considered amazing. Whatever I was doing was great and fine.
Mhm.
But it was societal,
Yeah.
where people were like, why would you leave this job that's so sexy and glamorous and all the things that people thought it was?
Yep.
But I was single still. This was in my early 30s. So I wasn't in the situation that you were in. So I want to ask you, what happened?
Yeah.
Do you still have that same husband, or do you have a different husband?
No, I have the same husband. So what was amazing, it was such an interesting point because I had this moment with Jonathan where I was like, I sat him down and I said, babe, I have something to tell you. And I'm like shaking and I'm saying, I think I'm actually here to do like ceremonial work with women and bring the sacred feminine like into people's lives. And I think I'm like a magical person. And he goes, I know. He was like, did you think I didn't know that? And I was like, oh. And so for me, I was projecting
Yeah.
all of my, inherited trauma, just like internalized stuff, lineage stuff, cultural stuff that I was obviously going to be rejected by this, more traditional partner that I had. And it was the complete opposite. And now Jonathan leads men's groups because, I mean, that's like a whole other thing we could talk about. But what he discovered was that he's a urologist. And so he had so many people coming into his practice that were struggling with issues, with erectile dysfunction, with no physical issues. And he realized it was because they weren't doing any inner work. And
Mm.
so it was such a great example because I started doing inner work and then I really grew and I got really self expressed. And so, in order for us to stay married, he had to do inner work and become self expressed because as I grew, I required a different partner.
Right.
And I feel really lucky that he also needed to become a different person for his own soul's path. And it lined up, and he was willing after some urging, but he was willing. And he got so excited about the inner work he was doing for himself and for me that he realized that he wanted to help men who were really resistant to inner work get into it. So that was an amazing story.
Wow.
But there were a lot of other people in my life who thought I was throwing my life away because at the same time, I decided to buy a retreat center outside of Boston with a temple on it. So, and like, where all the Puritan roots are and the witch trials are down the street. And this is not San Francisco here outside of
Right.
Boston. And people were nervous for me that I was going to come here and claim that I'm a priestess. And I wasn't actually a trained priestess at the time, but I was, claiming about doing circle and moon circles and that I wanted to bring more ceremonial work to this area. And that was really excruciating for me that I didn't feel supported by everybody in my life. But it really forced me to come into a deeper relationship with myself. And that's when I found your work because
Mm.
I realized that I was an overfunctioning codependent and I needed everyone to be fine around me in order for me to be fine. And I really cultivated a practice for just being fine with myself. I really crossed the threshold into true adulthood where I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet and chart my own path, and I didn't need anybody's permission anymore. And
Mm,
that created ultimate freedom. And so I'm really glad the path wasn't super easy for me. And
right,
I'm really glad that I was a team with Jonathan, because I don't wish doing this alone on anybody.
right.
Yeah.
There's something so beautiful, though, about that evolution for you in the way that you describe it, because when you do think about ultimate freedom, not needing the approval of everyone in the world,
Mhm.
there is freedom. And what's so interesting is that when you get to the point of not, it's not caring, it's not needing,
Yeah.
right? Like, I want to be understood
Yeah.
by the people in my life. And when I changed careers, my father was kind of like, why?
Yeah.
You want to go to NYU, get 100 grand in debt to become a social worker? Sounds amazing. Why would you do that? And even then in my life, I remember, thinking, I said, well, Dad, I'm actually not happy doing what I'm doing. And that's a priority for me.
Mhm.
And I just need your support. Like, I don't need anything from you. I just want you to say good luck. And he was like, okay, good luck.
Yeah.
And, he eventually got on board. But the point was, I couldn't go back. So the pivot was
Mhm.
inevitable
Mhm.
for me. And even with other people being like, well, how are you going to do it? And have you saved a lot of money? I hadn't, right? I hadn't saved any money. I spent
Yeah.
all the friggin' money that I made just traveling and doing whatever the hell I wanted,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like I had some great business plan of like what I was going to do.
Totally.
But I also knew that my soul's journey, my heart's journey, what my dharma, my actual purpose in
Mhm.
life wasn't what I was doing.
Mhm.
And for me, I had a cancer diagnosis in there when I was in my early 30s, and I'm fine, and I've been fine for decades. But there's a wake up. And I find in my therapy practice that a lot of women have a wake up from some kind of a medical crisis,
Yep.
a social crisis, like getting a divorce.
Mhm.
Something happens that shakes you out of our regular thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And the thing that I am trying to do in ceremony is get women earlier before that happens,
Yep.
because we are lacking initiations and rites of passage in our natural culture right now. And so what
Hmm.
happens is that the emergencies become our initiations and our rites of
Right.
passage, and our body failing or having a medical issue or going through a divorce or a parent dying. But if we actually put in rites of passage and threshold moments, whether it's around tracking the earth holidays like the equinoxes and the solstices, or getting together on a new moon and setting intentions as a circle and having support of other women there to hold you accountable, then we can actually make those moves without our lives needing to fall apart.
Right.
Or like
So
sometimes
let's
they fall apart, but it's after, and we sort of like know it's going to happen.
right,
Yeah.
right. We see it coming. All
Yeah.
right, let's talk a little bit about ceremonial circles, because there will be a lot of people listening to this or
Mhm.
watching this who don't know what they are at all.
Yeah.
So please tell us.
Yes. So the reason why I think ceremony is so important is because we have the opportunity to meet our soul, like the real and true part of us. And, we also meet our soul in therapy. Sometimes we meet it in a music hall. A lot of us can have the experience of meeting our souls in church. And I find that coming into ceremony is a very efficient way to meet the truth of who we are. So, people lead ceremony in very different ways. A lot of times people associate ceremony with doing a medicine ceremony, and that's not what I do. So, I don't work with any plant medicine or anything like that. What
Mhm.
people do report is that sometimes it does feel like being on mushrooms because we're doing so much great energy work. But when you do ceremony, you're either coming into my actual temple building that I'm in right now, or you come online. And what's so great about ceremonial space is that so much of it is energetic. So you really can do it both ways. And the idea is that I'm creating what my mentor calls it is a modulation station. I've been studying as a priestess for 10 years, and I'm trained in the art of holding a coherent container. And I specialize in doing that in large groups of people. So I'm
Mhm.
creating a coherent container, and when you walk into the room or you come onto the Zoom, it just feels different. It's the only way to explain it. You're coming out of like the asleep world and you're coming into the awake world. And often people will just come into my temple and sit down and start crying
Mhm.
because the frequency, and you can get into the physics, that literally our soul vibrates at a higher vibration than our not self personality. And I'm creating a vibration in the room based on my own energy, based on special incense that I use, and candles and colors, and calling in the directions and the way I tend to the land and all of the things. And that actually, vibration and frequency and sound waves will harmonize to each other. So you can't help but access actually a different part of yourself when you're in here. And then the real work we're doing is we are releasing what isn't working for us and going through a death cycle, clearing
Mhm.
out. And a lot of it is about releasing identities that don't serve us, identifying our conditioning, and letting it go. And we use ritual for that. We write it down and we burn it. And then we have this space. All of a sudden, everyone feels just lighter because, matter is just energy. So our fears hold similar weight to like an actual cup. And so if we
Right.
take our fears out and we put them into the paper and we burn them, it actually does release them from our energetic body. And then what we do, everybody closes their eyes and I lead them on a soul journey. And we really use the tool of metaphor to communicate with our soul. So this is, the work of Marion Woodman, who's one of my favorite psychologists and authors, who in her career really identified that the soul communicates in metaphor. So we go on this journey and people see animals, people see shapes, people see archetypes, they see dead relatives, whatever it is. And we put
Mhm.
together this language and decipher what is our soul trying to tell us. And what we can uncover is something we're not seeing. And I do a lot of vision work of who are we actually meant to be? Who are we and what are we here to do? And when we go into this space, we can see it. And then when we can see it, we can actually put it into our lives and start walking on our soul's path instead of the path of expectation that so many of us has been walking on. And then we set those intentions, we celebrate their singing, we always dance our faces off at the end, and then that's it.
So where is, I love that, sounds delicious. Tell me about the importance of witnessing in this
Mhm.
process.
Yes. So many of us feel so alone. And many of us think that we are the only person who's struggling with this. And that's usually because we're often the only person in our family or in our community who is trying to get in touch with our soul. And so we feel really alone. And then because of what's happened in history around the sacred feminine being erased and wiped out in a very violent way, we actually are scared of our own intuition and our own inklings. And oftentimes we feel like we're wrong or we're bad for having those. And so to get into a room and to finally just first feel how the other women are on the similar path, and then to be able to hear them say what they're up to, and then to take a moment to share what's coming up for you and to share your journey and to just be seen, you just realize that you're not broken and that nothing's
Mm.
wrong with you and that you're not crazy. And to me, that is the most valuable thing because we've been so isolated. And just realizing that our dreams are not crazy, our desires are not crazy, our dream, like our actual dreams that we have at night, the signs that we're seeing on a daily basis, all the ways we're waking up, when those things have company, we keep going.
That's so amazing and so beautiful. And so I can see this in my therapy
Mhm.
practice. I also have a mastermind group where I don't know why I always felt this way, but I always did feel this way about the power of women gathering,
Yeah.
and that I've always been such a girl's girl.
Mhm.
And that's not a
Same.
girly girl. Don't
No.
mistake those things.
Yeah.
This is a woman who loves women.
Yep.
And I have the same friend since fucking Nixon was in office. Like literally, I've got three sisters. I've got, like I just collect people, but there's something so satisfying and powerful
Mhm.
about being witnessed, like you're saying. And
Mhm.
I think about a mastermind, like in my mastermind group, it's women who don't feel seen
Mhm.
in their communities, or their ambitions
Yeah.
are more than the people around them, and they feel
Mhm.
almost embarrassed.
Yes.
And so to be with a bunch of women who just friggin' want you to win and are so excited and have their own big dreams and are only want to be a part of the solution.
Mhm.
And I feel like that I don't know, and I wonder what your husband's experience is with the men's group,
Mhm.
but I feel like naturally women stick together in this way.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you've been taught something different, but my life experience has been that women are so important
Mhm.
to my happiness, my girlfriends, my groups that
Mhm.
I'm close to, because there's such safety
Yeah.
in that space. And it always bums me out so much when women on the internet and people write into me and say, well, you know how women are so catty, so bitchy,
I
so
know.
this and that. And I'm like, they're not though. Like, or that's just not sort of my experience of it. So I love what you're talking about. And I wanted to ask you, for everyone listening and for me as well, how do we integrate,
Mhm.
because, this into our everyday
Yeah.
life experience? How do we integrate more ceremony
Yeah.
into our lives?
That's such a great question. So for me, I like to think about the way I set up my life is what do I do every day? What do I do once a moon cycle? And what do I do once a year? And so for me, every day I do what I call a sacred start, which is I take an hour every morning. A lot of people just do half an hour. And I meditate, but my meditation is really about going into vision and seeing the best possible outcome of my day, asking the goddess, how can I be of service today? What am I not seeing? What do you need me to do? I'll journal, I'll stretch, I'll light a candle, and I'll pull cards. But for me, it's all about how can I be the truth of who I am. And then every new moon, we get together as a community inside of Holy Woman and we set intentions. We release from the last moon cycle, we set intentions. And then on the full moon, I get together with my crew and we celebrate what's been going on the past 2 weeks. We do more releasing. And then 2 weeks later, we're back at the new moon cycle. And then once a year, I go on pilgrimage for myself, and that's at different places all over the world. And then I also host a retreat here where women can just come to pilgrimage here, be together, be with the land, skinny dip in the lake, be fed, feel like queens, and have an actual spiritual experience with the earth. And last time we did it, it was wild because we had, 80 women here. We were all in high ceremony together and we were doing this big releasing ritual. And we look up and there's just like 6 vultures circling around our circle, which are the bringers of death and rebirth. And then we were doing this work around Mary Magdalene, and it was when Venus was coming out of the underworld, and we were talking about Inanna like rising as the queen. And then all of a sudden, I was calling in snake energy, and I looked down, and there's a snake just like
No.
slithering through the circle. And so it's just so cool to just actually see it. So that's a big piece. The other piece is that I really love looking at whatever religions we grew up with that we still have in our house. So in our house, I grew up Christian, Jonathan grew up Jewish. We're raising our kids, both of those things, and pagan. And so, but we're looking at mystical Christianity and where the sacred feminine actually was in Christianity. So every holiday is about Jesus and Mary Magdalene in our house.
Mm,
Every prayer is about God and Goddess. And in the Jewish faith, we're really looking at Asherah, who was the original goddess of the Hebrews, and bringing her into a lot of our practices. So I think that is really beautiful because we don't have to throw out our family religion, our culture, and our lineage. But I do believe we can add to it and bring in
right.
the sacred feminine into those practices and traditions.
Ooh, I love all of that. All right, I have one more question for
Yeah.
you. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it if you have?
Oh, that's so good. So I was an over hoster where I was always the one to throw everybody's birthday party and throw all of the dinner parties, and everyone was always at my house, and no one ever invited me over. And it sucked. It was
Yep.
really hard. And I realized that it came from this deep desire for community, but I was killing myself and really overworking in order to have community. And I realized that a lot of the community I was creating was not reciprocal.
Right.
And so I had to really ask for what I needed. And in some places I was met, and in other places I just really wasn't. And so I had to let some connections go. That was really
Mhm.
hard. But so with every boundary, I mean, comes often like a lot of grief and a big loss. But I have so much more energy now because I'm not throwing dinner parties 3 nights a week.
Right.
Like, I was like,
Seriously.
oh my God, I have so much energy and like so much more money. And it's just amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
That
I
was a
love
big
that
one
so
for me.
much. So, Sarah, if people want to work with you, if they
Mhm.
want to learn about your temple and your whole retreat
Yeah.
center, if they want to come to retreats, how do they find you? How do they do that?
So the best place to go is to sarahjenks.com. And my signature program where everything happens is Holy Woman, which you can find at holywoman.org. And we have lots of amazing stuff going on. We have a retreat in September. And Holy Woman is a really affordable, incredible community. And it's just would be lovely to have you if you feel like checking it out.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're
Thank
doing.
you.
Thank you for being here with us today. I so appreciate you.
Thank you, Terry, so much for having me.